Ara bé, sí, no, deia que només volia ressaltar la magnitud de l'esdeveniment, que no tots els dies tenim la possibilitat d'estar i de sentir a investigadors de l'alçada d'Oksana Bulgakova i de Dietmar Hochmuth, pla i contrapla, no? Col·laboradors, suposo que tan estrets i tan importants per tantes coses. Bé, per dir molt ràpidament la trajectòria d'Oksana Bulgakova, diré que com Dietmar Hochmuth són professors, en el seu cas, de història del cinema i d'anàlisi del film a la Universitat de Mainz, Maguncia, que diem aquí, però també havia estat professora a Stanford, a Berkeley, a Viena, a Berlín, a totes grans universitats de prestigi. És una de les investigadores més importants sobre l'obra de Sergei Eisenstein. La seva biografia, publicada ja fa uns anys en alemany i anglès, és una de les biografies de referència i sobretot té aquesta virtut de ser una biografia que arriba quan ja s'ha escrit molt sobre Eisenstein i en canvi té un treball sobre arxius, té un treball d'investigació sobre textos no publicats, sobre arxius desconeguts o no treballats que fan que aquesta biografia sigui una biografia de referència. Insisteixo que ella és una de les investigadores més importants en aquest terreny. En aquest sentit, jo ara li comentava, hi ha tota una escola, una tradició de teòrics i d'historiadors del cinema que aquí, a Catalunya i a Espanya, coneixem molt poc perquè ens falten traduccions i que en canvi és un dipòsit de saber importantíssim, no? Són, per exemple, els historiadors de l'escola russa que després han anat als Estats Units o a Alemanya, com és el seu cas, en els dos països, no sé, altres com Yuri Sivian i gent així, i aquí els coneixem molt poc, però són historiadors claus, molt importants si coneixem poc la seva recerca i en canvi és una recerca fonamental, no? I és fonamental en el tema que ens reuneix per aquest congrés, no? I per això volia ressaltar la magnitud d'aquest esdeveniment. Bé, una cosa que a mi em fascina del treball d'Oksana Bulgakova dins de les seves investigacions d'Eisenstein és el seu treball sobre els diversos projectes, podríem dir, inacabats o tant projectes fílmics com projectes teòrics, no? Hi ha una cosa extraordinària que treballa ella, que són els 3 grans projectes teòrics d'Eisenstein al llarg de la seva vida que, a més, culmina en el cas de la seva obra amb la publicació d'una obra que ja s'havia publicat a Rússia, però que ella torna a publicar a Alemanya en 4 volums, que és el mètode d'Eisenstein, una obra que ell desenvolupa, una suma teòrica, no? Una obra magna que en principi recull alguna així com el projecte de tota una vida d'Eisenstein desenvolupat entre el 32 i el 48, que ella recull i publica Potemkin Press, l'editorial de Dietmar Hochmuth, no? I en aquest sentit importantíssim també la seva feina en aquest aspecte. Publica en 4 volums amb aquesta editorial i està accessible, es pot comprar, és una obra de referència i molt poc coneguda, especialment, insisteixo, per exemple, en el nostre àmbit. Bé, ella ha investigat sobre Eisenstein, a part de la seva biografia també ha publicat els escrits sobre cinema de Kazimir Malevich, té un llibre sobre la FEC, sobre la fàbrica de l'actor excèntric, en fi, té una sèrie d'obres molt importants. Però el treball de recerca pel qual està aquí o pel que ens ha semblat que era importantíssim que estigués aquí, sobretot el primer dia d'aquest congrés, és aquesta recerca en forma de DVD que es diu The Factory of Gestures, Body Language in Film, que és un projecte de recerca molt important, sistemàtic, sobre aquesta idea del cinema com a eina, com a aparell que registra i, per tant, emmagatzema la memòria dels gestos d'una època, entenent els gestos com allò on, d'alguna manera, localitzem allò que d'alguna manera funciona com a símptoma de transformacions en el cos humà, però també en el cos social i en la història. Ella ho treballa en el marc del cinema rus, del cinema soviètic. Llavors hi ha aquesta idea que per mi és molt important, que no es tracta només de que el cinema registri i que, per tant, conservi alguna cosa que ja existeix, sinó que el cinema opera, és a dir, fabrica i construeix d'alguna manera aquests gestos, per exemple, a través del muntatge. Aquesta idea de que el cinema fabrica, construeix i opera sobre els gestos també els transforma i els retorna a l'espectador, que pot fer aquesta experiència dels gestos i d'alguna manera genera un circuit que és el circuit pròpiament cinematogràfic i, si em permet, ja diré revolucionari, en el sentit que en els anys 20, després en els temps de la Revolució Soviètica, es planteja aquest altre origen de la història del cinema, en certa manera un origen perdut, una història del cinema truncada en un moment determinat, que funciona sobre aquest treball, sobre aquesta operació d'agafar un codi gestual existent, un codi que, com ella treballa, és heredat del teatre, és heredat d'altres representacions, de la dansa, etc., i d'alguna manera és reconfigurat en el marc del cinema. Aquestes mutacions, aquestes metamorfosis, aquestes transformacions que el cinema opera i fa veure, aquesta idea de fer veure a través de com mostrar els gestos, com renovar, transformar el codi gestual, són l'indicatiu d'una revolució que també és una revolució a nivell social i que és, evidentment, un moment excepcional en la història de la humanitat, però també en la història del film. I llavors, en el seu treball, ella ressegueix una mica aquest moment revolucionari i després com en els anys 30, en els anys 50 i fins al moment contemporani, com canvia aquesta codificació gestual, aquesta idea del cinema registrant, però també operant, transformant, construint, fabricant els gestos que defineixen, que conserven la memòria d'un moment històric, d'un moment social i que, en certa manera, també registren, informen sobre tots els canvis que s'han produït. Nosaltres podem retornar, com fa ella en el seu projecte, podem retornar sobre les imatges, podem retornar sobre aquests gestos i podem pensar de quina manera podem rellegir aquesta memòria històrica, aquesta memòria de les transformacions del segle. Sobretot, el més important per nosaltres crec era aquesta idea que jo crec que hem de confessar que està a l'origen d'aquest Congrés i que està a l'origen del que serà una futura publicació on hi haurà un text d'Oksana Bulgakova sobre aquest tema, que és aquesta idea de la fàbrica de gestos. Llavors, si ella ho treballa sobre la història del cinema rus, del cinema soviètic, nosaltres el que ens plantejàvem era aquesta idea d'aquesta fàbrica de gestos, com funciona ara, quins gestos fabrica, com opera, quines són les operacions que actualment en el cinema contemporani es treballa sobre aquests gestos, quins gestos es fabriquen en aquesta fàbrica de forma contemporània, quina memòria fan emergir aquests gestos, per dir-ho d'alguna manera també quina política de gestos podem definir en el moment actual i quina classe de gestos polítics, gestos ètics, també podem localitzar en la nostra contemporaneïtat. Per tant, jo crec que és de justícia reconèixer el nostre deute amb Oksana Bulgakova com a font d'aquestes qüestions que són una mica les que originen aquest congrés i aquesta recerca nostra i, per tant, és el punt perfecte per tornar una mica als orígens, per tornar el que ella planteja i perquè ens expliqui una mica com s'origina tot això, és a dir, com funciona, com es desplega, com es construeix aquesta fàbrica de gestos que ella treballa en aquest projecte de recerca, insisteixo, en estreta col·laboració amb Dietmar Hochmuth, que després ens explicarà de manera més concreta aquest DVD que recull aquesta recerca. Així que gràcies a Oksana Bulgakova i gràcies per estar aquí i per explicar-nos això.
Thank you very much for this introduction. You know everything about me. I couldn't imagine it, flying to Barcelona. Thank you for the invitation and for the possibility to present it. And I excuse because I will speak English, and I hope you can follow my presentation. The idea was what happened with our body memory. Previously, the language of gestures was transmitted from adult to children, passed from teachers to students, preserved in books on good manners, demonstrated on stage, and practiced in dance lessons. But what happens to the body memories when the pace of change accelerates and the boundaries of social groups and cultural tradition become permeable in the century that has seen people become moviegoers, especially when consider the way in which film can move across national and social borders in their everyday experience. Film preserves the body language and facial expressions in motion, but it also influences the motor behavior of its spectator. The observed change are happening in the context of the increased global image circulation that influences the code of representation in film, the body images in advertisement and in the reality. My research is not so much the investigation of different methods of acting, but rather of the changes in the body culture that I understand as the being part of a central project of the 20th century, the creation of a man of the multicultural modernity in the global world. The object of my analysis is, on the one hand, the creation of the ideal subject on the screen that easily adapts and creates the gestures and adapts these gestures to the condition of the changing multicultural modernity, and on the other hand, the reciprocal conception of dynamic between an increasingly international film flow that revives Abi Warburg's concept of wandering images in a new medial dimension and the selected modes of representation of the body and its effects. My book and the DVD, The Film Factory of Gestures, addresses this metamorphosis of the body language, mostly in Russian and Soviet society in the 20s, 30s, and 60s, as evidenced by the documentary and fiction films, but I also used private and professional photography, visual arts, literature, a lot of the description of gestures in novels, what kind of verbs were chosen to do that, memoirs, diaries, and naturally theater. The inspiration of these projects come from a variety of sources. In the early 20th century, the predominant view was expressed by Charles Darwin in his Expression of Emotion by Man and Animals, and strongly supported today by the American psychologist Paul Ekman. Darwin believed, and Ekman believed too, that the expression of emotions is universal, but thanks to the essay of the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss on body technique, written, published in 1936, this view has changed. The gestures were now seen as inscribed in the cultural code of society and interpreted as a historic and social document. The idea was strengthened by David Efron, who investigated and examined the changes in the gestural language of Italian and Jewish emigres in the American societies over the two decades, only 2 decades, and several generations. So I followed this inspiration and concentrated on the non-significant gestures, just on the way how people walk, sit, stay, rest, how they maintained the bodily communication with the non-significant gestures, rhythmic non-significant gestures that support their speech. This moment were usually studied either by physiologists or physicians who observed the pathological deviations, or social anthropologists or linguists who studied the types of bodily communication, or cultural historians who focused on manners and etiquette. The observed changes in the body language are connected to the body's subordination to the greater control or restriction, or to the removal of this restriction. The attention of the art, theater, and film scholars was usually concentrated on the iconographic, emblematic, symbolic gestures, their origin and mutation. What insights can we gain from observing how people on the screen blow their nose and spit? I think we can give something from that, and we'll show you later. In his studies, The Process of Civilization, Norbert Elias, the studies was written in England during the immigration, published in 1939. Norbert Elias imparted great significance to this kind of behavior. If Freud associated the development of civilization with the history of shame, the repression of instincts and their manifestation, making this process synonymous to the history of neurosis, Elias wrote the history of civilization as a history of the socialization of the body that could not, and body technique that could not be performed and represented in public, and became more and more unspeakable. By studying the etiquette, Elias focused on the disappearance of such words as urine or snevel from the descriptions in the book of manners, on manners and public speech. Peter Brooks, the historian of the French Revolution, treated the hiding of these body functions as the history of privatization, in which such function as eating together, farting, or burping undergo moral, ethic, or aesthetic evaluations. These notions shape the architecture of our dwellings, with their special accommodation for toilets, sleep, and food that define the education of the children and the mode of representation in the art. Therefore, these insignificant gestures also became mediator of the transition from the biological body to the cultural body, to the social body, in the specific time and in the specific society. In terms of this series, the study of the insignificant gestures, with the help of film, could reconstruct the cultural codes of a given society. A changing appraisal of this or that body technique in the system of film as a graceful or disgusting, decent or indecent, and its attribution to a specific space, a bedroom or a pulpit, gender or age, child, adult, and so on, can serve as an indicator for such change. The theater always cultivated the significant gestures. They were elaborated in the theatrical culture that was for many centuries a school of the correct behavior. The expression of passions, grief, anger, happiness, fear on the stage was standardized, and the semiotics of the theatrical gesture converged through the boundary of culture, not because the bodily expression is universal, but because for the expression of these emotions, the stage elaborated a collection of the limited signs adjusted to the rules of the representation, and these signs were transmitted from one culture to another. And the books about the theatrical rules and representation codes were translated from German into French, into English, and back. So it goes really as a first global tradition of universalize the code of representation, I stresses, not the emotion. The theatrical gestures, as you see, reveals in the significant body language some certain general ideas of the European culture about semiotics of the spatial arrangements, top and bottom, the moral haze and downfall, back and front, so the past behind you and the future in front of you, left and right, the evil and the good, vertical, addressed to God, male, phallic, and horizontal, so terrestrial and female. The authors of the first manual of the acting came from the school of rhetoric that was oriented not to the everyday gestures, but to the conventionalized standards that corresponded to the concept of the beautiful and ugly, sublime and low, tragic and comic. Performing a gesture that had to be read and understood by the spectators, the actor would freeze for a moment. These significant gestures and pose were trained in school, reproduced by the actors and mimicked by the spectators, and the relationship between the spectator and the model changed with the appearance of film in the century of the big social change, because film does not work with a freeze moment. It's always the flow. So the semantics is blown away. So you have to adjust it in a new way, and you have not the whole body. You have always a fragment. You have the montage, and you have the very creative way to combine these different parts that are not the parts of the same body sometimes. And naturally, the social change. That's why I choose the Russian society, because the social change there during the 20th century were so radical. As the Russian Revolution disturbed social norms and tradition, the society experienced a change of the gestural code. Art and social institutions proposed utopian, sometimes contradictory models of the new body behavior that should be imitated in reality. And the socialist program included reshaping human nature. Leo Trotsky, one of the revolutionary leaders and big admirer of Freud, wrote in his book about the everyday culture, man will become stronger and smarter. His body will become more harmonious, his movement more rhythmic, his voice more musical. Science will aid in the creation of this higher social biological type, this Superman, if you like, and the arts will give this process a sublime form. So the new society, the Soviet society, striving to free itself from old rituals, was developing a new design of clothing and living spaces, new standards of perception in the visual art and film, and a new body language for a new anthropological type, a Homo Sovieticus, a specific version of a man of modernity. And the Soviet cinema had to fit into, but also to create this new social model, and the cinema used very eclectic sources for this new construct that didn't exist in the reality. He used the rhetorical gestures of political leaders, eloquent gestures of theatrical melodrama, the vulgar gesture of common people represented in the vaudevilles, the ritual folklore gesture of Russian peasants, the new gestures of the decadent, flamboyant, hysterical bodies, the body language of the American film stars, athletic cultures, Taylorism, and even more. These different systems of body expression were actualized in sometimes unexpected combination, and films became very complex behavioral texts, visualizing and simulating new types on the screen as a model for imitating in reality. Why film was interpreted as a complex behavioral text could be understood in the frame of different theories that emerge with the appearance of film in the 20th century. The main point of all of them was connected with the fact that film, this apparatus, this was invented to record movement, would enhance the imitative abilities of spectators with respect to the motor activity. In the middle of the 19th century, an English physician, William Carpenter, described a motoric phenomenon that was later confirmed by electrophysiological experiments and was called a Carpenter effect. The observation of the motion of a human body causes in the observer a reduced contraction of the same muscles which participate in the motion of the observed. And each spectator knows, and you know it too, without any knowledge of the Carpenter's effect, how tense your own muscles become when you follow the fights, the pursuits, or the dangerous tricks on the screen. The Russian politician and artist didn't know much about the Carpenter effects, but they supposed the imitative abilities of the population could be trained with the help of film, and they used film pragmatically as a pedagogical means that could accelerate the process of the modernization of a society. And it was an agrarian country that saw himself as a modern industrial country. So how to adapt this agrarian population to the new urban culture, industrial culture. Film should help by selecting forms of the everyday life and human motion, wrote Viktor Shklovsky, one of the formalist film theoreticians. Now where do people have such backward habits as we do? Probably we put on even our code incorrectly. Habits passed from one generation to the next uncontrolled, because the everyday life cannot be instructed in the usual way. And the moment we will factories as landscapes. But the factories does not need to control themselves on the screen. We did not film how to breathe, how to sweep a room, how to wash dishes, and how to heat a stove, although we are so inefficient and barbaric in all this action. It is necessary to create a film which would not mimic life, but train it like a dog. So he wrote it in 1927, repeating the earlier ideas of Leo Trotsky. And the Russian film director produced a lot of such films. But it were first the industrial films that really shows how to put on your coat, how to wash, how to dishes, and how to use the shower, how to drive the car, the tram in the city, and how to cross the city, because many peasants who came into the city didn't know. So the films was made to show them how they had to cross the street and to ride the streetcar and so. Among this film, there is also one that has a title, Do Not Spit on the Floor. Primarily peasant in the Russian silent movies before the revolution, and not only in the movie but also in the reality, were characterized by constantly spitting. That was a habit, and on the screen a mark of the social status, and this status was not ethically evaluated. Trotsky, however, wrote in his Problems of the Everyday Life, and he educates the reader with regard to communism, but simultaneously he advises them not to spit on the floor. And so, please, could you switch the microphone?
Behavior is affirmed as a way to identify the new class and the new norms of a more democratic society, dealing yet another blow to good manners. Peasants spit, belch, cough up phlegm, wipe their noses on their hands and sleeves as they please. They are free from the constraints of civilization. Handkerchiefs disappear. Male and female protagonists scratch their ears, pick their noses, and adjust their pants and shirts. They knee each other in the rear and poke each other in the stomach. In the 30s, these physiological gestures are often performed by actresses of aristocratic descent, a detail that adds an element of coquette stylization. Gradually, however, constant spitting again becomes a mark of vulgarity.
So the film Do Not Spit on the Floor was made in 1930. A peasant from Solzhenitsyn's stories, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, the story is written was published in 1962, who came into a camp at the end of the war, that means only 10 years right after the release of these films, notes that the Russians forgot how to make a sign of cross with the right or the left hand, but they and he already knows that to spit on the floor, even in a very dirty room, is inappropriate. Elias has observed that the introduction of the handkerchief took in Europe 200 years. In this time frame, 20 years of educating the population to stop spitting is the record of spit. But not only this habit was radically changed. It's instructive to look at the way how people walk. The trained, rhythmically organized military march in the films about the pre-revolutionary time made in the 20s was the attribute of the oppressors. Remember the march of the soldiers on the Odessa steppe in the battleship Potemkin. What happened then?
In the 20s, people
Could
walking
you
on the streets
switch
betray
the
a lack of
microphone,
mastery
please?
over their bodies. Once military drills and lessons in etiquette
once
are
more.
abolished, people lose their upright posture and measured stride. In films from the 20s about pre-revolutionary era, only the oppressors demonstrate the ability to walk and march in a well-trained manner. The synchrony and rhythm of their legs is figured as a part of the soulless machine, the punitive battalion in Mother, or the soldiers on the famous Odessa steppes in battleship Potemkin. The victims and the revolutionaries move spontaneously even at demonstrations. These chaotic crowds invite comparisons to the natural elements. They are like floods. But in the mid-20s, a new fashion arises. Both documentary and feature films show children and pioneers learning how to march, to walk in a rhythmic and synchronous stride. By the 30s, everybody marches. In documentary footage of the first parades, the soldiers do not know how to keep formation. Their arms dangle, they slouch. By 1945, the parade has a different look. In the 1930s, both professional actors and extras achieved the required synchrony of movement and military bearing. Marching, a fundamental bodily technique, helps people acquire the new, springy, athletic walk. Military and proletarian heroes, men and women alike, walk and stand like well-trained officers with good posture, not like strung-out neurotics. This is how they move in the shop, in the parade, on stage, and when they go on a date. To emphasize the new civilized stride of the clumsy peasant woman, the director includes a long scene that shows a dark silhouette walking against a brilliant white background. This way, the viewer can observe the movements of her legs, her straight toes, her tense back, the turn of her body, the position of her head. This militarized walk is parodied in Hollywood. Ninotchka's emancipated red commissar steps out of a strict march into a waltz.
Yes, thank you. In the 30s, Stalin started this big jump into the modernization of the society, where 300 cities were built and 70% of the population from the country moved to this construction site. The Soviet society was on its way to modernization, and this process should change the body language of the peasants who migrate to the factory during the first 5-year plans. We should educate people to move correctly, to become a master of their own body. Otherwise, we could have the same distortion and the same catastrophe as was shown by Chaplin in modern times on the conveyor belt. It's without sound. It's the same, the machine that educates the people to move. By the end of the 30s, when the Soviet society paid a very high price for this accelerated modernization, and Soviet director Alexandrov, assistant of Eisenstein, trained in Busby Berkeley-style musicals, produced a musical about the Soviet Cinderella, The Radiant Path. Not a good sorcerer produced a magical transformation to the ugly peasant girl, but her labor work in the factory. Because the girl learned how to move correctly, her appearance changed. At the end of the film, we have a modern beauty. A moment, yes. This is the very beginning. And her first arrival, but she learns how to deal with the machine, and the machine dictates her body the other rhythm and transform her biological body. And this is also from the same film. And the end, we have this beauty who meets in the mirror her previous image and could not recognize herself. George Bernard Shaw created at the beginning of the century a fairy tale with a play based on language, Pygmalion. The idea was, when we teach a girl how to speak, how to use the language correctly, we can make a lady out of her. The Russians suggested something different, not only because the film depends on the bodily expression. if we teach the people how to move correctly, we can make them into the new human beings. And machines help them to learn how to move, because the machines facilitate the rhythmic imitation with a simple double measure rhythm, like march. Orlova, this is the name of the actress, and Alexandrov realized the program of Soviet constructivism in the field of creating a new mechanical person in the biological body who could conquer a national inability to manipulate the legs and the arms and subordinate the biological body to the clear rhythm of the machine. But the body language of the cultivated heroine becomes poor, and at the end of the films, she stops moving. In her immobility, she approaches the figure of the bas-relief and even the language of the surrounding statue. This is the models for the reference for her, is even more agitated as her own body. The erotical agitation is transformed in film as in the Victorian painting to the environment. And in the last sequence of the film, the hero do not embrace, so we have not the kiss at the end, but the camera scanning upwards reveals the statue of the worker and the peasant by Vera Mukhina that was that crowned the Soviet pavilion on the Paris exhibit of 1937, and this statue was frozen in the ecstatic impulse, and the ecstasy of these figures substitutes the traditional and absent kiss. How about the kisses in the film and gestures of flirting and love? The love scenes are choreographed in a courteous, as in a courteous cultures. In the majority of the cases, the directors try to suppress the body contacts between the beloved. In the film, the wife and the husband do not even embrace each other after a long separation. The man only caresses his wife's hand. Also, the novels of the social realism propose only verbs that sketches an inhibited contact between the beloved. But the contact between the friends is very corporeal, and this tender contact among the male friends produced even an effect of a homosexual culture. Maybe we'll show some part from the DVD. But the contact, the bodily contact between a young woman, young girl, and a man is very restricted. At the same time, the tradition of the rhetorical gestures are actualized on the screen and the gallery of the new heroes, the political leaders. And this gestural code, and it was of the most interesting thing in the socialist films, is transferred from the public sphere into a very personal sphere, structuring the intimate space as a public space. These rhetoric rhythmic gestures that have no meaning, but just structure the speech in the periods, like by Roman public speaker, are used without a gender differentiation, and I say in the private space. And this is a very interesting thread, because these gestures were created and introduced by the film. But I will show you it's now a short sequence that shows these transgressions of boundaries between private and public, military, civilian, male, female, adult, child. And 40 years later, or even 20 years later, you can observe these artificially created gestures in the documentary footage on the people who were moviegoers at the time when they saw these films of the 30s. Now, touching we'll do later. Mm-hmm. Could you please switch the microphone?
Fists make their appearance both in public space and in personal conversations. The public speaker intrudes on the bedroom, and the ingenue makes her way onto the podium. A coquette uses these vertical rhythmic gestures when flirting with an officer. This commander talks to a girl using the same gestures with which he leads the troops. A girl with character makes rhythmic and aggressive motions with her fists, talking to her girlfriends and her boss. When the ingenue instructs her timid bridegroom how to propose, she hammers in the same way. Private conversations, such as declarations of love or heart-to-heart chats between friends, incorporate the rhythmic gestures of the podium, hammering and shaking fists. This transfer of the public gesture into private space is a defining feature of the socialist hero's bodily expression. Not until the thaw do films start forgetting these gestures of public speakers and show people engaged in more intimate table.
Okay. Good. This is something new, and we move, as you see, in the other period. This lifting of the Iron Curtain spelled not only a rendezvous with abstract expressionism or atonal music and modern design presented for the first time on the American exhibition in Moscow in '59, but it also the experience of a normal Soviet citizen was challenged by a new form of non-verbal, pre-verbal physiognomic experience brought by the huge amount of foreign films that appeared on the Soviet screen after a big break for almost 20 years. And this experience influenced even everyday movements, manner of walking and sitting, and sharply differentiating the younger generation raised not on the Soviet film of the 30s, but on the Western trophy film that were brought from the Reichsfilm archive to Moscow, about 5,000 copies, and other films that were bought and presented in Moscow and otherwhere from Italy, France, United States, or India. The Tarzan series alone, I dare say, wrote Joseph Brodsky later, looking back in this time, did more for de-Stalinization than all Khrushchev speeches at the 20th Party Congress and after. One should take into account our latitudes, our button-up, rigid, inhibited, winter-minded standards of public and private conduct in order to appreciate the impact of a long-haired, naked loner pursuing a blonde through the thick of a tropical rainforest with this chimpanzee version of Sancho Panza and lianas as the means of transportation. Add to that the view of New York with Tarzan jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, and almost and entire generations opting out will become understandable. Joseph Brodsky explains the unfettering of thinking by the way of the relaxation of joints, but this change in motility was only one aspect of a wide-ranging break with tradition, and film became one of the most powerful conduit of the new experience. We can see it not only in this time on the example of Russia and development in this closed society, but also in the Europe after the war, when the American GIs and American movies flooded the European countries also after 8-year breaks. The American moves differently. They sit differently, like this. So they appeared in the European culture like barbarian or wild, like Tarzans, who were walking in a different way, sitting in a different way, dancing in a different way, and it was naturally condemned as an inappropriate, erotical behavior, like this movement of a man with a swinging hips. I have here two images from the book From the Good Manner on the right side from you, so how the young people have to behave and how they behave. So it's impossible with this kind of moving their legs in public. So this is the same kind you have on the right, how you have to sit in public and how you do not have to sit in public. This is the American way. This kind of body postures is naturally presented by Marlon Brando in private space. But it was taken over, as I show you. Okay, this is the same kind of relaxed back, but it was taken over into a public space. There are the young German youngster waiting in front of the cinema to look on the new cult figures like Brando or James Dean, and not only in West Germany, but also in Poland or in Russia. James Dean produced a lot of imitation in all European culture and created in each country his own double. And it was attributed to the youth culture or German culture or beat culture. But Jack Kerouac summed it up in the 60s. Beat generation has simply become the slogan or label for a revolution in manners in America. It will change a few dresses and pants and make chairs useless in the living room. But pretty soon we will have a beat Secretary of State. And it happened. It happened also in Russian films. And we can observe these changes on the same very simple body technique, the way of walking. And I put at the beginning different kind of walking. Could you please switch the microphone? From the beginning of the century to the
Then
20s
it appears
and
artificial
30s.
next to the artless dynamism of the adolescent body. Hollywood actresses spent a lot of time learning how to walk.
First thing I want to see you do is walk. The heel of the foot comes down first and then onto the ball of the foot, like that. Do either one of you know what was wrong? No. First, your posture. I'm going to have Virginia Gray, a young featured player, show you the correct way of walking, sitting down, going up the stairs, and coming down again.
The anthropologist Marcel Mauss noted that French girls began to walk differently under the influence of American actresses. Compared to staged Hollywood beauty and its real-life imitators, nymphets in the 60s seem provocatively natural. Brigitte Bardot walks around barefoot but places her feet like a professional ballerina. The new dances aid in the liberation of legs and hips. Soviet walking also becomes more liberated in the 50s with the help of the Chechotka, a kind of tap dance. Soviet youngsters copy the gait of American cowboys from coveted American films, swinging their hips like models on the catwalk.
system. I have to go to the... One moment. Oh no. Sorry. Doesn't good. I have to go back to the clips because it's too long for.
Soviet walking also leads in this 1966 film observe films from the 60s register a new impetuousness. Protagonists fly up and down the stairs. Jumps soften the gait of old functionaries. The leads in this 1966 film observe the way foreigners walk in documentary footage. High heels change how women walk everywhere. It is now impossible to distinguish the Soviet woman from a French actress playing in Italian. These bodies bear witness to the process of civilization. They are a result of upbringing and training. The backs are straight and balanced. People don't waddle or shuffle their feet. Differences in posture are no longer an indicator of social status. Instead, they reveal differences in biology, age, and profession. The amateur actor gives his walk, that of a slouching student, to the screen hero, a demobilized soldier who works as a killer for hire. The liberation of the youthful body is perceived as an alternative to mass behavior and demonstrates that body language can free the body from the prescribed social standards. Even the parade on Red Square falls out of rank and loosens up.
I stop here and give the floor to Dietmar, who present this DVD Factory of Gesture that we produced in 2008.
Gràcies a Oksana.